Dasee Berkowitz, and I'm the author of this book, Becoming a Soulful Parent, A Path to the Wisdom Within. And I am here with my very good friend and colleague, Rabbi Lisa Sacks from Bet Torah. And I'm really delighted that you're here and we're together and then we can be in conversation. This is a part of a series that we're doing with Pardes Institute for Jewish Studies. We are in around soulful parenting and what that actually could mean and could look like in this time, in this kind of very challenging time that we're in, parenting through the coronavirus and through this whole year. So I'm really delighted to see that so many of you took time to be with us today. A little bit on prayer and our prayer lives. Last week, I was in conversation with Rabbi Aryeh Ben David, and we talked about chaos and the chaos that we experience and what insights potentially can come from kind of murky, unknown times. And today, we're going to be looking at some of the rituals that can actually really ground us and guide us, and we can rely upon, and that are always there for us, especially and even when we can't actually control what's happening around us. What we can control is really cultivating and opening ourselves up to developing a spiritual life, and especially as mothers and as fathers and as grandmothers and grandfathers, how important our spiritual lives are, especially now. So what we're going to do, we'll start with a short meditation, and then I'll be sharing a little bit from the book. I'll be in conversation with Lisa, and then midway through, we'll ask you to actually do a little bit of personal reflection. As fun as it is to listen to other people talk, what's even more important is how what we say might resonate with your inner life, with your inner experiences. So we'll be asking you to do a little bit of writing, so be sure to have a pen and paper nearby, and then we'll be reflecting back together for the last part of the session, and then closing in an hour's time. So that's the plan. I will also say that this is recorded, and but your responses will mainly be saved for the second half, which will not be recorded. So you should feel very free to share very openly and freely. I wanted to start with a short meditation. I'm thinking about this time now. We are Rosh Chodesh Adar is coming up on Friday and Saturday of this week, and there's this beautiful idea that Misha Nichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha, those who bring in fully this month of Adar are the ones who become overwhelmed with joy. Or really bring more joy to the world. And it's a funny thing for us to even imagine that we could be joyful now, when I think so many of us feel this kind of dullness in our lives. So I want to, in the spirit of Adar, just invite you to close your eyes for a moment and to just settle yourselves a little bit. I think we're all very multitasking human beings with monkey brains that are jumping all over the place all of the time. So I just invite you to take a moment to take a few deep breaths, really just to situate ourselves in this moment, in this hour together. And I want you to think about one moment from your day. Some of us are in Israel and it's the end of the day. Some of us are in different places in America and it might be the beginning or middle of the day. But one moment today that was just joyful, that maybe brought a smile to your face, or you felt a kind of sense of joy inside. A moment, a glance, maybe it was something you saw outside, a flower, a phone call, conversation, really anything. Just take a moment to focus on that, fixate on it a little bit. Something that gave you joy, and I want you to kind of look at it, to almost even re-experience it if you could. Just that feeling inside of you when you felt that joy. And just take another breath, and then we'll join everybody again. So I invite you to take that sensation, that feeling of joy, with you now into this session and into the rest of your day. And there's a beautiful quote by Anne Lamott, who's a very popular writer and speaker, and she says that laughter is carbonated spirituality. I love that phrase. So I invite us to kind of be full and robust in our carbonated spirituality when we laugh, because it lightens the soul a little bit more. So we'll jump in. I want to read a passage from this book about prayer. I write a lot in the book around challenges and struggles that we experience as parents, and what are the ways in which an orientation, a soulful orientation that really sees our Tselem Elohim, this image of God within us, as primary and as central, and as really a lens through which we can look at our children to see that they have a particular tikkun or something they specifically have to bring to the world, to fix and to offer the world, and that we do too. And I want us to think about, or the book is really it is kind of weaves in and out of our personal experiences and some of this orientation, a soulful orientation. And one of the chapters I wrote was about prayer, and this happens all the time to me. I find that our prayer lives, I think, are probably quite different now. Some of us might have feel very comfortable with spontaneous prayer, and that might be our go-to, or reciting mantras or affirmations even, which I would put in the category of prayer. And others have a more formal relationship with prayer, whether you've been trained as a rabbi or just are an active community member and you belong to a synagogue and go to synagogue, and that's your time to pray. For me, as a mother, I found that my prayer life totally changed once I had kids. That fixed time, that moment to have a retreat in a fixed setting was kind of blown open. And instead, I had to find moments. And then even as my kids got a little bit older and I was able to return to synagogue settings, I found that I wasn't able to experience it in the same way that I once did, where I would go through all the prayers and I would feel, my Jewish education would really kick in and I would know what I was saying and I would feel good about that. But instead, something else happened. So I want to read to you a little bit about it, and then I want to hear. We'll hear from Lisa also about your own experiences with your prayer and prayer life. Our home can be a pressure cooker. On Saturday mornings, when we all begin to rattle, we just barely manage to zip, button, and lace ourselves up and head out for the 10-minute walk to meet Leon, my husband, who has been at synagogue since its doors opened earlier in that morning. Here in this sacred space, surrounded by white walls, smooth floors, and the friendly hum of prayers, the pressure is released and my children's energies simmer. There is space and light, and there are other children to play with. Sometimes we get there late, just in time for the end of the service. On one such occasion, as members began to clear their chairs and prayer books, I clutched mine tightly. I needed to pray. And as my children and husband joined their friends at the Kiddush in the main hall, I left them and the general grown-up chatter and made my way back to the synagogue space. I found a quiet spot near the door that opened onto the green foliage of early autumn. I stayed put, the words and letters drawing me in. Instead of taking the words apart, I remember theologian Henri Nouwen writing, we should bring them together in our innermost being. We should wonder which words are spoken directly to us and connect directly with our most personal story. My eyes were pulled to the word ahava, love, which begins the prayer ahava rabbah, a great love. In the prayer book, this prayer immediately precedes the Shema, Judaism's central declaration of faith. I started to play with the words in my mouth and was struck by the vowels. Ah, ha, va. There's so much breath in that word. It's a word that both starts and ends with ah. In the middle, there is a v sound, a vet. And when you add a dot in the middle, the letter becomes bet, as in Breshit, the first word of the Hebrew Bible, in the beginning. Over the span of that morning, I had sounded the first vowel, ah, with exasperation, and waited for the ah, the moment of release. In the middle, bet, a new beginning, brought on by the prayer that entered me. The words ahava rabbah opened within me a new awareness, as if to say, this great love of yours can hold everything. It can hold the arg of the children's bickering and the ah of tenderness also. It can hold the frustration and the release. This prayer reminded me that even though I can shift quickly between frustration and release, I need to pay attention to the bet. At the climax of the transition, if I listen, is the chance for a new beginning. Kiddush had ended, my prayer time had concluded. I took this insight, this new perspective with me as I gathered up my children and we headed home into the autumn air. So I wonder for you, Lisa, as a mother of two and a rabbi who's now professionally, you're in the business of prayer, and I'm wondering for you, what animates your prayer life? What are the prayers, for me in this passage, this ahava rabbah, this great love, and being able to really kind of really focus on ahava was a focus for me. But what are the prayers that animate you the most? Or tell us a little bit about your prayer life.
Of course. It's so nice to be here, Dasee. I just want to give you some appreciation for inviting me into this conversation and also to send some greetings out to some of my colleagues who are here and my friends and congregants from Bet Torah. It's really nice to see all of you here. So when I think about my prayer life and as a mother and also as a rabbi, I really think about it as what Heschel calls a thirst for companionship, that we have this existential loneliness, even when we're with other people. And that prayer for me is not always, but a lot of it is this sense of being accompanied. So a really, really important prayer, and I was thinking about this story recently, is the prayer for healing. Because for me, it's not so much that I'm asking God to, cure me of what is happening to my body, but it's a sense that I'm not alone in what ails me. And when my kids were old enough to stay awake enough for a service, we raised them in a Reform synagogue, so the main service is on a Friday night. And, speaking about chaos, you take kids to a service and they're running around and they don't want to pay attention and they don't understand what's going on. But, week after week, it's both the modeling that they see me as having a prayer life and that prayer and community is important to me, but it's also the exposure. So we would get to the Misha Berach prayer each service. And my daughter, who's now 14, Lucy, she would turn to me and she'd say, do we have anybody? Do we have anybody? And more often than not, we wouldn't. But it happened that when she was 6 years old, she fell off of some playground piece of equipment, and she broke her arm. And it was a Thursday afternoon. We had to go to the hospital, and she ended up having to stay over and have surgery on Friday. And she didn't get out of recovery until late Friday afternoon. And as we were getting ready to leave the hospital, she said, Mom, do you think there's anyone who could say the Mishaberach prayer for me? So I called a friend of mine from our congregation and added her to the list. But in that was such, you talk about trying to find the sacred moments as a parent, and they're few and far between when you've got your hands full. That for me was such a beautiful sacred moment that my daughter had this tool to feel accompanied in this really, really scary, she's 6 years old, hospital, surgery. I mean, every time the resident would come in and say, oh, I see you're going to have an operation, the screaming would start all over again. But she had this, like, that for her was comforting. I'm not alone. My name will be read. My community will hear me, and God is here holding my hand as I'm going through this. So for me, it's really that sense of companionship, that sense of kind of like a ground floor that's holding me, and that's what I try to pass on to my community and also to model for my children.
Well, I love that. I love that, Lisa. And, I think that this, and, especially now, when we all feel so alone and so isolated and so kind of within the four walls of our own homes that are kind of closing in on us, because we've been here for so long, that this sense, I think the sense that we're not alone is the most comforting thing that we can offer each other. And there's something almost imaginary about it, like when we don't see other people who are with us, or we're not on a call, or we're not next to somebody. There's this power of imagination that kicks in to know that in these moments when we're physically by ourselves, that we're not alone, that someone else is thinking of us, is sending their prayers to us, or that God somehow is also accompanying us. And I think that power of imagination is something that comes so naturally to children, and there's almost a way in which, and this is really for folks who are busy in the business of congregational life and building congregations and communities, to know how much we can learn from children's innate spirituality, right? That they live in imagination, whereas for us, it might be harder for us to conjure up sometimes. And I remember I had this experience with my daughter, Yael, when she would go to sleep at night. We would sing the bedtime Shema, and we would sing B'Shem Hashem, which was, kind of inviting all these angels to surround her, Michael, Uriel, Gabriel, the angel of light and the angel of strength and the angel Raphael, the angel of healing, all around her. And I remember her just she would like lie down and she was like, "Bye, Uriel. Good night, Raphael. Good night, Gabrielle," and just, kind of wave to everybody. And it reminds us, or it reminds me that prayer doesn't have to kind of remain in this experience of holding only a prayer book open, but to be able to imagine how these words, how these images, how these angels surrounding us, how this concept of God, can offer us a sense of protection and companionship, as you say.
Mhm.
I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's not also about the companionship and not, and offering gratitude and offering praise. There was another story that I wanted to share about my daughter, my older daughter, Gigi. We had gone through kind of a rough time as a family. A few really bad things that happened kind of in close succession, and then at the end of this kind of really intense 4 or 5 month period of bad things happening, our beloved 6-year-old dog died. And I was driving my girls, who were then, I don't know, 11 and 9, to school. And my younger daughter, Lucy, who's had a very robust sense of her relationship with God, was saying how she was so upset and she was crying to God and all this. And she said to Gigi, why don't you try talking to God? And Gigi said, you know what, God, you talk to the hand. I'm angry at you. So it was a way for her to kind of work out some of these feelings of just being so frustrated and overwhelmed, and angry about all these things that had happened to her. So it wasn't just, it's like, oh, my life is so great and oh, all these wonderful things are happening. It was really like another place and another outlet to express feelings when things weren't going well.
Yes, and what that makes me think about is the that the importance of that it's a relationship, right? That she's experiencing that I have a relationship and I'm angry, and I'm wondering, I'm so moved by research around how important it is to cultivate a spiritual life in children. This like natural spirituality that they have, and how that really helps bolster them in teen years and later. And otherwise they'll kind of look for other kinds of spiritual experiences or risky behavior, and that might not be so fitting for them. But it's how important it is to both model it and invite that in and invite in those conversations. And I'm wondering about, you know, even the times when we might have, um, one of my kids has a very like he said once, you know, you're all standing around and you're praying to nothing. I don't know what you're standing around doing over there, and there are lots of people who have very, don't actually have a relationship or don't really aren't really connected to this concept of prayer. Like, I wonder, how do you think about that? And how would you, how do you invite people into developing a prayer life that for them, maybe it's really not what they need, kind of what would your response be, do you think?
I think that, something that Rabbi Avi Weiss writes in his book, Holistic Prayer. He talks about that the belief in the inner goodness of the human being can always be tapped in prayer. So that it
Mm.
doesn't just have to be about my relationship with God, however I define that, but it can also be about trying to tap into the ideal of what I want to be, and what's the gap there between my ideal and where I'm out. And so it expresses, our prayer life can express our yearnings to be better, to our yearnings to communicate, our yearnings to try a different profession, our yearnings for companionship. It can be not just about that relationship, but it can be about our relationship with ourselves. You had asked me before about a prayer that sort of helping get through a challenging time, and I respond mostly, personally, to the preliminary prayers in our service, in our morning service, which are much more personal and much less about the God component. Um, Although this one does have the God component, but it's the Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorahi, that there's a place that my God, the soul that you have given me, is pure. And so to think about our neshama, that like our innermost soul, as a place that is just goodness, that is just holiness, that is just a pure, beautiful place. And that when I'm feeling really crappy about the way I've parented or the way I've related or all the mistakes that I'm making with my life, that I can return to that beautiful, holy light place that everyone has. That to me, I think, gives me a lot of solace as a human being. And John O'Donohue, who I love and who you quote in your book, he talks about it as this place that's never been wounded, where there's a sureness still in you, a place of confidence and a place of tranquility. We make mistakes. That's what it is to be human. But if we can know that there is this place within us, that might be really, really hard to find because it's been clouded over and it's been occluded by all of the stuff going on in our lives. And I think prayer, because it helps us slow down and help us tap into that.
Well, I love that. I love that. It returns me to this sense of, how we were born, right? We were born pure, right? You were born this like pure soul that also knew everything, maybe, and had to be shushed with all the knowledge that we had before. And now we're coming into the world to kind of re-experience life, for that famous midrash. But to say that we have that opportunity all the time to go back there, all the time. Every morning we can say that prayer again, or we can even sing it. I mean, it's a popular song just to sing, throughout our day. And to know that to know that it's this additional resource that we have, to be able to slow ourselves down and to be able to go into that quiet inner space. I mean, I wonder for you, do you find that, do you pray at home? Do you only pray at synagogue? Do you find moments of prayer throughout your day? How do you, it's this thing of like, how do you fit it all in, right? And, I know that for me, there's a sense of, when you know that it's a resource for you, just like your breath is always a resource for you, you just get to go there whenever you need to, wherever you are, however you are. And I know that for me, it's a sense of, even though things might be swirling and I really can't control what's happening around me, to know that I can control and shift my perspective or open up this additional channel to something more, to something me'ever, something beyond, can be really, can make all the difference, actually, can really make all the difference. But what about for you? Like, how do you see your prayer practice?
Just one more note about the Elohai Neshama, because it has so many beautiful melodies. But this morning I was, and thinking about our conversation this afternoon or this evening, where depending on your time zone, and I asked Lucy, the broken arm one, honey, what's your favorite prayer? And she goes, oh. And then she started thinking about it. She says, oh, Elohai Neshama. And I go, oh, really? Why? Because that's my favorite too. And she says, oh, there's some great dance moves. The song we sing at camp. So, everyone has their own path in. My prayer life, for me now, is definitely not about we're not going to synagogue, so it's not about what's happening in synagogue. But when I was leading services regularly, it was hard, and I struggled with this a lot I've just become a rabbi recently, for those of you who don't know me. So I just finished rabbinical school this past year. And so when I was in rabbinical school, I struggled a lot with, like, how do I pray and lead others in prayer? And what I found that I needed to do was right beforehand, as I was putting my talith on, I would take just like a few moments before I was engaging with others and before I was serving as a facilitator for others to have the spiritual experience. And and it helped me both calm my nerves, because singing publicly was something that I definitely had to get used to. But I would just have a moment of like immense gratitude for this opportunity to kind of like change my own path, and have spirituality be what I'm doing most of the time. So that was like one moment that I took for myself. But these days, I have found that, and people have heard me say this before, they're like, there's too many words in our liturgy. It's just like, it doesn't work for me. It's too much. So I tend to focus on, one line in a prayer, and singing it over and over again. And I find it much more, I'm much more able to connect when I'm doing that on my own. So whether I'm, meditating or walking in the woods, just like singing something to myself over and over again, those are the moments where I find it for myself, less than when I'm in the liturgy. And with my kids, it's the bedtime Shema, like you were talking about. It's Friday night, singing the blessings and, putting my hands on the kids' head. And still, as teenagers, they'll like put their heads in to wait for, my hands. And it's those little moments, is where we're finding it now.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. I want to invite us all to think about this, of kind of, where does prayer live for us? And what I'm going to put in the chat now, a couple of questions, and I would love for you to just reflect on it for yourselves. Really asking ourselves, Ayeka, where am I with my own prayer life? How might it be a resource for me, formally, informally, spontaneous, fixed, any kind of prayer that you've heard here so far. So when was the last time you felt the impulse to pray? What was the circumstance of your life at that time? Maybe this morning, it might be 5 years ago. And then if you could write down a word or a phrase that if you repeated it over and over again as a mantra, that it would give you a sense of calm, perspective, and direction. It could be a prayer that you love. It could be a kind of kavanah or intention that you'd want to really have for this time in your life now. So, Lisa, do you have anything you want to end with? And then I'm going to end with a short reading.
Yeah, I was thinking about all the uncertainty that we're going through right now, and that we have, we want things to be settled. We want to know when this is going to end. And one of my meditation teachers, she loves to quote Rilke, that we need to try to love the questions themselves and to live the questions. And sometimes through prayer, we feel like we want to find the answers. Sometimes what prayer helps us do really is to identify and feel secure in just living with the questions themselves.
Beautiful. I also just end on that note. I'm gonna read something that it's from my book that I quote Heschel. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel says that prayer is not suited for casual or occasional use now and again. It is rather like an established residence for the innermost self. Our innermost selves need a place away from falsehoods and absurdities of the world, writes Heschel. And I would add that we also need a place away from the real and imagined concerns about our families that we carry with us. I pray because my soul needs a home, a place in which to simplify all the complexities, in which to call for help without being a coward. Such a home, Heschel says, is prayer. How can prayer help us whenever we feel that we need to gather up our innermost selves, when we don't know what to do, when we want to ask, what now? This moment can often untangle the knot of worry that is wound tightly around us. So when I pray, I step into a different dimension, an internal quiet, ayeka, or where are you, par excellence. In this dimension, I don't feel obligated to answer the question, what am I supposed to be doing now? Prayer involves a different kind of probing. Prayer shifts the focus from doing to affirming. When I pause and return to my breath or use ancient words to call out, I can connect to something far more essential, the knowledge that I have the internal resources to move through what I am experiencing. In fact, we all do. So we'll end here. We so appreciate everyone taking the time to be with us today. I've so appreciated being in conversation with you, Lisa, a dear friend for 20 years. And we were at Pardes together and ages ago. And we're so grateful to Pardes for hosting us to be in conversation with each other and with all of you. And really to hear how prayer helps us, helps you, and to help inspire each other, really, to continue to take the next steps in all of our journeys as parents, as people, as we navigate this very uncertain time together. We'll have one more session through this Per Day series with Rabbi Mark Baker next Monday, the 15th, also at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 9 p.m. Israel time. And we'll really look forward to coming and being a part of that. We invite you warmly, and thank you again so much, Lisa, for being a part of this.
Thank you, Dasee, and thank you for shaving some years off of our friendship. It was more like 25 years ago.
I like to flatter. I mean, we
Right.
look the same age. Like, let's face it.
Talk with all of you.
Oh, Laila Tov. Good afternoon, everyone.